Okay, so we're back. This is Ray Ramos once again. So I had the epic opportunity to ask George Romero all the questions that I've ever wanted to ask about his films, about The Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, the writings that he's done, like for Creep Show, things on the Tales of the Dark Side, all the stuff that he's done over the years. This was the opportunity to ask him all those questions. And I started off, of course, by saying, what are your inspirations? Which now realizing what I asked him, I kind of like, oh my God, man, what am I doing? What are your inspirations? Who asked that question to a master of horror like Romero? But he very, very, very nicely told me like, oh, I like all the classic movies. I like old time monsters like Frankenstein, Dracula, and Wolfman. And we started talking about the Universal monsters and how that affected his vision as far as, making horror movies and making them scary. He said that that as a child, those movies really left a lasting impact on him, and everything that he did after that was kind of like paying homage to these monsters. He always felt that, apparently, from what I asked him, he always felt that the Frankenstein monster was one of the most dismal and sad monsters around, and that he didn't feel that he was really a monster. He was just misunderstood, that humanity is a real monster when it comes to things of that nature, because in the pursuit of creation, in the pursuit of trying to do more than we are humanly possible, we try to become God. We try to become those people who want to change life as we know it, and that kind of brought the whole question about the zombie genre up. And I was asking him, so zombies, why did you do that? What was the whole thing? And he says it had a lot to do with the fact of the way that society was. Society doesn't really care. Racism, societal, mannerisms, and the paradigms that the society has placed upon us as a civilization, and we fit into these little sockets, kind of, in the way that that the world works. Zombies, of course, is a mirror of us. We are zombies. We go through life not knowing what we want, just wanting, in other words, mindlessly. And especially during the 60s, there was this whole thing of, we want a change. And that change came in the way that the civil rights movement and racism was affecting America. And we did get that change at the end of the 60s. And it was a great change, because that gave us, as a society, a little bit more humanity. And he was speaking about that. He was trying to make an impact as far as the way people looked at the horror that humanity is. It was a very deep conversation. I wish I could remember everything that he said, but overall, that was the whole main point of Night of the Living Dead. I mean, Dawn of the Dead became more about consumerism, and Day of the Dead was just the dissatisfaction with the 80s. Just it was a big arc that he had to explain, everything that he felt as far as the horror of living in the 20th century, and noticing that the way that humans act with one another is very, very scary. I asked him, what he thought about the recent movies, the resurgence of the zombie genre, and he said he liked some of it. He said that some of it was very, derivative of everything that had come before. He wanted to see something new. And that's when I started in on him about my idea, which was Hell's Pass, which is my take on the whole zombie genre. Very, very grindhouse type of a story that I had been working on for a while now, ever since I had met the 656ers, and they asked me to play in their sandbox, and I agreed. They were like, yeah, go ahead and spin it. If you guys aren't familiar with 656 Comics, they're based out of Juarez, Mexico. We're right on the border. I'm based out of El Paso, Texas. We're right on the border. We're like, throw stones distance away from each other. And they asked me to kind of do my version of what they were doing in Mexico, but do it on the American side, on the United States. And I pitched it to George Romero. I told him, this is what I'm doing. I'm taking the border, which I live on, and it is a border town. It's right up against Mexico. It's right up against Juarez, and El Paso is quite different than Juarez Mexico is. Juarez is considered the most dangerous, or was considered the most dangerous city on the planet, and El Paso is nothing like that. El Paso is very, very quiet and very, it's a good place to raise a family. There's not a lot of crime, not a lot of violent crime. I think that year when I managed to meet Mr. Romero, there had been about 12 murders for the whole year in the whole city. And the city is quite large. There was at least at that point in time, at least about 800,000 people living in the city, almost a million. Now, Juarez, on the other hand, has, at that point, I think they had 1.2 million people living there. So if you put the two together, it is a huge area, and there is mass, a dense mass of people just living there and breathing on the border between Mexico and the United States. And he was very fascinated by that. He's like, oh wow, I've never been down in that area. He was a Philly guy. He was from the East Coast, and but he had heard about El Paso, he had heard about Mexico, but he had never actually visited down here. Now I started explaining to him what Hell's Pass was about, and he took quite an interest in it. So Hell's Pass is my brainchild, my idea as far as how the zombie genre is viewed, as far as I'm concerned, in this part of the country, living on the border between the United States and Mexico. And down here, we experience this kind of culture seclusion, if you will. It's its own thing. The people that live on the border, they are very, I guess you could say, introverted as far as the rest of the country. A lot of things that happen in the rest of the country don't really affect this part of the country, of the Southwest. We see certain things on TV, and it's kind of fascinating. And at the same time, we're dumbstruck by the fact that this is happening in the United States, which we are part of. El Paso's just on the tip of Texas. We are exiting Texas, we're the last stop. Entering Texas, we're the first stop, as long as you're going east. And we see a lot of diversity here. There's a lot of course, Hispanic community. There's white, black, Asian. It's a melting pot, so to speak. We're from the land of Beto O'Rourke. Beto has been in the news as of late. He's apparently the savior of the Democratic Party. Blah blah blah, all that stuff. But I don't want to get into politics right now. We're talking about zombies, and we're talking about comics. Actually, in a way, zombies and politics do fit into what I'm talking about, because of the way that the city is, the way that the society in itself in El Paso is. Now, we are on the border of Mexico and the United States, El Paso, Texas. We view Mexico as a foreign land, which is very strange, because we're right up against them, and even in saying that, them, it's more than that. We are sister cities, and it seems that everything that happens to Juarez happens to El Paso, but in a different way. So there's mass chaos in Juarez because of the drug cartels, and in El Paso, it's more the paranoia, the fear that something might happen like that here, that the violence from Mexico will spill over into our part of the country, and then we'll have to deal with it. And the thing about that is that the dichotomy is very strange, because everything that's happening to Juarez we don't see, but we hear about, and everything that's happening here in the States, Juarez doesn't see, but they hear about. And it's strange to view that on this side of the border, on this side of the borderline. And once again, I come back to the whole them, us thing, and that disturbs me to no end, because there is no them, there is no us. And when it comes to the zombie genre, that's where the line is blurred. There is a them and an us, because us are the living and them are the dead, even though we were all human at one point in time. And the way that I mean that at one point in time, because humanity decays. Humanity in itself decays to the point where we become worse than the undead. At least the undead have a purpose. They just go on and they feed and they destroy. But humanity, we give ourselves purpose. We give ourselves the reason to go on, to make things better, to strive to be better people, and all that goes out the window as soon as the apocalypse is mentioned. I was watching a movie the other night, the Range 15, made by veterans, and it was interesting to watch what they think as far as the zombie apocalypse is concerned. And these are well-trained individuals. I mean, don't get me wrong. This movie was made for veterans, by veterans, and it deals with the zombie apocalypse and what happens. And apparently, I was talking to an Army friend of mine, and that's what they're waiting for. Actually, the U.S. military is waiting for a zombie apocalypse, a zombie holocaust. And ex-military veterans are waiting for it as well, because they are prepared. They know what to do, and that's the thing. They know what to do, but the general population, what the hell do we know what to do? Nothing. We know how to cry. We know how to run and hide in a hole. And some of us have, that have played a lot of Call of Duty, or a lot of Resident Evil, or Left 4 Dead, or hey, even The Walking Dead. We've watched The Walking Dead. We see how society decays, but at the same time, are we ready and prepared to deal with that once it happens? My answer, no, we are not. None of us are prepared for that. And that's where Hell's Pass, that's where I take the story in Hell's Pass. It's a group of individuals that you would know, a group of slackers, because that's all we really are in essence. None of us want to work. None of us want to pay bills. None of us want to do anything. We want to be free of all of that and be able to pursue our interests. So this group of individuals, they pursue that interest in the way that you would expect someone to pursue that interest at the end of the world, by doing whatever the hell they want. In my eyes, that's what would happen. We would erode. There wouldn't be any heroes any longer. There wouldn't be any law. There wouldn't be anyone trying to keep the peace. Everything and everyone would erode, and there would be mass chaos and anarchy in the streets. Everyone out for themselves, everyone trying to survive just to get by, just to get their peace before everything goes up in flames. And that's what happens in Hell's Pass. The individuals that are part of Hell's Pass, they're assholes. They're plain and simple. They're assholes. And they don't care about anything other than their own self-interest. They only care about getting by and getting beer, getting cigarettes, and maybe getting a piece of tail. That's what they think. And that's what people would erode to. That's what they would become. They would become these zombies in a way, trying to feed their own desires, their own passions, and their dark desires at that. And this is what I was pitching to Mr. Romero when I was speaking to him. I was telling him, like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this zombie comic. It's going to be on the border between El Paso and Mexico, and it's going to deal with all the dirty stuff, all the stuff that you don't hear about, So we see certain things in The Walking Dead about how society degenerates into these monsters, but do we ever really see it? We just see it in between the panels, or we think about it in between the panels. And I brought that forth to him. One of the things that I expressed to Mr. Romero was the fact that in his movies and his stories, we see society degrade. And there's only so much that we can see, of course, because, you still got to sell it to Hollywood. You still got to see it on film. So we're not going to see like baby eating and things of that nature, and rape and murder and pillaging and, trim the hedges and ride off on the women kind of thing. You're not going to see any of that stuff because it's still Hollywood. But in comics, it's different. We can take that approach, and we can take it because there is no limit, there is no budget, and we go there and we'll show you exactly what we want to see. And he was very intrigued by that, because he's like, wow, that's something that's never been thought of before, and that's original, that's really good. And I was very impressed. I was like, whoa, wow, is he giving me a compliment? He's like, do it. It's about time. It's about time someone did that with that part of the country that is ignored. Because honestly, the border is very important to the structural foundation of society and civilization in the United States. We have this line, in an imaginary line that floats in the air somewhere or is drawn in the sand, that separates us from them. Why? Why is that? Because they are not us. They are the zombies. They are the undead. We are the living. We are society. We are the ones that have to keep that idea of civilization alive. And Mr. Romero looked at me and he was like, do it. And I expect to see it, and I want to see it done. And when you're done, as soon as you're done, you send me a copy. And he gave me his address, he gave me his information, his personal address and information, and I lost it. I lost that information, I lost that address, and I felt like shit. Because damn, I could have had his blessing. I mean, I already had his blessing and his approval, and of course his quote, because I did put that in the book, but I could have had his critique. more so once the book was completed. And that has haunted me to this day. And now it's almost, it's an impossible thing to get him to view it and see what he really thought of it. And that makes me kind of sad. But we're here now. We are available, and our book is available as well, so you can take a look at it and decide for yourself if I'm just full of shit, or if I'm trying to do something different with the genre. And the thing about that is, I'm not gonna hit you over the head with all the stuff that I just spoke about as far as socio-economical politics and civilization and the ruin and the erosion of humanity. No, of course not. I'm gonna veil it all with dick and fart jokes, because that's the way it is. That's what people gravitate to. You look at the book, you open it up, and there's gore and there's violence and there's all these things happening, and you're like, oh crap, you're taken aback by that, but you don't see it right away. And once you start looking at the book, and once you start delving into the book, that's when you really see it. That's when you see what I'm trying to say. You see the music in the madness, or the method in the madness. So the last piece of information, the last, I guess, blessing that you could say that George Romero gave me was not to give up, not to just rest on my laurels, but to strive and try to achieve what hasn't been achieved before. And that's something very important, something very dear that I have held on to all these years in working on these books, because books take a very, very long time to come out. And sometimes it seemed the story was never going to get finished. It just had to keep going and going and going and keep working at it. Kind of, it's reflective of something that George also went through, I guess you could say, because he had kept working on everything. When he finally left this world, he left over, I think it was like an estimated 50 written scripts sitting there waiting for someone to pick them up and make something with them. He had already done his job. He had told the story, but now it was up to somebody else to continue the legacy, to continue what he had started. And that's something that I've kept near and dear to my heart all these years, to keep going, to keep striving, to keep different options open, try different things. I've done poetry, I've done scripts, movie scripts, I've acted a little bit, I've done poetry slams, but always I come back to the writing, always come back to the comics, and that's my guiding light right there. And if anything else, that's what George Romero taught me, to keep going, keep striving for the best, not only the best that you can put out to show others, but the best within you. Something that you can be proud of and show off. And that's something that we're trying to do with Hell's Pass, with the Infestation universe. It's a very cohesive universe. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of action, adventure, romance, horror, overall horror, because it is the human condition, and that's something that isn't explored very often. The horror of the human condition, the horror of being human and watching these atrocities happen, and how slowly you become a monster as well. And that in itself is something very horrible, something very terrifying, because we see it every day. Right now we are witness to a change in the world. The paradigm is shifting, and things that 10 years ago would be considered inane and insane and just completely horrible are now a fact. You can go on Facebook, you can go on Instagram, you can go on Twitter, you can go anywhere on the net and see these terrifying situations happening across the world, and not even across the world, in our own backyard. People getting murdered, people murdering others in horrible ways and terrifying ways. And that's something that that is very, very different from 10 years ago, when it was, I guess, a tamer world. Even though 9/11 had happened, it was still a little bit not as insane as it is now, with politics and society and just the cultural differences that divide us every day. And that's something that that Romero brought to the light with his work, with his films, with his writing. We witnessed that back then. He was witness to what was to come. He warned us of the way that society would degrade and dissolve. So thank you, George, for leading the way, for leading the charge, and showing us what horrors lie beyond our own imagination. And that's something that I hope to also enjoy and putting out there sharing with all of you the machinations that happen within my own mind and how I come to these realizations, how I come to these conclusions, and present them for you in a format that is, I guess, suiting of what I'm trying to do. Comic books, Hell's Pass, Infestation, The Adventures of Jack Dillon. Yeah, that's the main character's name, Jack Dillon. A little bit of everything in there. And the overall message that I'm trying to bring forth, which is society is on its way out. And if we're not aware of the situation, or we choose to ignore what's happening around us, then we won't be around much longer to see what comes next. Ooh, kind of borrowing a little bit of a quote there from The Walking Dead, huh? What comes next? Maybe I'll talk about that next time. We'll talk about The Walking Dead. We'll talk about the influence of zombie comics on my own writing, other than Romero. Other things that I've written or read, rather, watched, movies, my top 10 zombie movies of all time. You'd be surprised what's on there. Stuff like that is what we want to do with these little casts that we do, with these little informational snippets of our lives and our work ethic and our inner workings of the mind, kind of thing. So please, stay tuned, keep us in your thoughts, and of course, keep watching this YouTube channel for updates and other stuff. We'll be doing a lot more as we make our presence known out there in the real world before the whole shit house goes up in flames, right? And of course, message us, email us, support us, subscribe to us, comment, like, all that other good stuff. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're all over the place. We are 6x6 Comics, and we're here to stay. Till next time.